Okay, welcome councillors, welcome ELT, welcome Jasper over there. Those online, welcome to a budget meeting today. From a tennis perspective, Councillor Robin Holmes is attending via Zoom. So she is in attendance and everybody else is here. So we have no apologies. I would like to acknowledge the country that we meet on today, the Wyanda area, and the elders of the traditional owners, past, present and emerging. What a fabulous last 10 days we've had, just endorsing that. Councillors, the budget meeting is ordinary council business, so it sort of takes a little bit of precedence over conflict of interest. We just classify this, but has anybody got any concerns there might be something in here that could be perceived as a conflict of interest? As I mentioned, in ordinary council business, that's sort of over the rules. I'll just give you the opportunity just in case. Okay, we'll move on to 5.1, which is the adoption of the operational plan. Would somebody like to move that we table this one for consideration, please? Morris and Burns, thank you. All right, I think it's pretty straightforward, but I'm asking for comments for or against the operational plan. Councillors, as was mentioned this morning, in a brief talk, that we want to make sure that the aged care is kept on the agenda. I notice it is there on as COM 1, option papers presented. Did we want to do any more with that?
Yeah, through the chair, we did discuss having the assisted living facility and ageing at home service added to that, because that's all part of the aged care facilities for our communities.
So it was assisted living?
Assisted living facility and ageing at home service. Sorry, through the chair, there was another question on Councillor Holmes, if she was on, she was going to ask about was the human resources shared service. I myself don't remember discussing this. And I know she did have a couple of questions about that.
Okay, so perhaps on ECO2, we can make a business model for HR services developed and discussed. I'll drop that in.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just confirm?
ECO2?
Yep, so just discussed.
Developed and discussed.
Yep.
Discussed with council.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor has joined the meeting. She's that with one of the
Okay, thanks Robin for joining.
Sorry, can I just go back and clarify? So on COM 1, we would like assisted living facility and ageing at home service.
Yes, added to that aged care facilities as part of
the options paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I see we've got beautification of Laura down there. Is there any chance that we can put Cohen on that, because it's looking a bit, in the way of parks and gardens and tidy up, it's looking a bit doomed. Yeah,
I think that's through the chair. I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, yeah.
Enviro 4, NV4, the environment, the irrigated area within the bore fields to attract cattle, etc. The power for that irrigating and all that, that's only when it's really dry that's when that would happen.
The intention is that it's a bit innovative. It's working on a theory that, cattle come to the side of the road because the green grass is there. So it actually is providing an enclosed area of green grass to attract the cattle. So it will be irrigated when it's dry. And, you know, the idea is that the cattle will come to where the green grass is and then they can be effectively caught and then either returned to where they should be or
Get them away from Keating's.
yeah, it's a trial method, you know, and the budget allocation for it is relatively small to actually try and resolve some of the issues that we have with that wandering cattle on the road. So it is just seeing if we can, if it is possible to attract them to one place to make it easier to contain them.
Yeah.
if they need to.
On Eco 3, it's just for noting that with the surplus land, Councillor Logan will be raising a notice of motion about sale of surplus land to get it into a productive, get some productive out of our land holding. So just bear that in mind that will be upcoming. So when we're identifying, we need to be looking at what market values are and how we will actually be going about putting it on the market. The good analogy was made that this building we're sitting in today was funded by the sale of council surplus land. So transferring something non-productive into productive and also creating rate-paying properties as well is a good way to go. Anything else in there, councillors? Right, can we pass that motion just saying with those noted amendments?
The ideal situation would be to adopt them with those specific amendments. That would be my preference because then you have a formal record of the requirements that council has. So there's been a couple of specific requests. So the aged care, I believe we can put in, and also the shared services to be developed and discussed with council. They are specific amendments. The other issues regarding questions or noting, I think we can just let be if councillors are comfortable with the answers because it doesn't specifically change the content of the operational plan.
With the exception, so through the chair, of the, because it specifically says Laura for the beautification one.
And Laura.
To add Cohen into that one, so it's quite clear that's council's direction.
Yeah. So it may be that one councillor would like to move all three changes, or it may be that you want to go through a process of amending the resolution several times to arrive at a substantive motion. But if one councillor would like to move all three, then we can have the recommendation resolves to adopt the operational plan with the following amendments, and then list those amendments, number 1, 2 and 3. And then that requires a seconder, put that to the vote and then go back and put the substantive motion to the vote if you all want to agree, or if the majority wants to agree with those changes.
Councillor Pope, Councillor Burns,
Yeah.
Morris, Councillor Burns, okay.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
Robin agrees with that?
Are you happy with that, Robin? Is she on?
Yeah, sorry, I just had to take this off on me. I'm fine with that.
Right.
So if one councillor would like to move an amendment,
Councillor Burns, second. Councillor Hale.
and councillor Burns, would you like to read out your amendment, please?
Would you like to read it out for you?
Yeah.
That's why.
Well,
That's
yeah,
why
I mean, I just wanted to add Cohen to the
Okay, so
initial one, and the other councillors can read out the.
Let the CEO.
councillor Hale, would you just refer back to the number, the assisted living and aged care, sorry.
Assisted living and ageing at home service to be added to
COM 1, sorry. Yep. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, the HR shared services, that was ECO 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second dot point is the human resource shared services be developed and discussed with council. That's ECO 2. And then the third one, councillor Burns, is Cohen added to
Cohen one is what it goes.
Yeah, Cohen 1 or whatever it was. Yeah.
COM 1, ECO 2. and Com1. Are all councillors clear on what is being proposed? So someone has to second Councillor Burns.
Councillor Howard has.
Yeah.
So I'll put that, which is now the amended motion. If councillors were in favour of the amended motion, please signify. Carried. Now, councillor Holmes, you happy with that?
Yes, I'm in favour, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that now becomes a substantive motion.
Correct.
So a move and a second again for that. So we've got Morris and Hale this time. I'll put that motion to members. All those in favour of that new substantive motion, please signify. Carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well done. Moving on to 5.2, which is the differential rate categories for the financial year. There's a recommendation there that we adopt this. To move that we table this one for consideration, please. Morris and Burns, thank you. Okay, that's open for discussion, please, councillors. This is the differential rates category. And we have some discussion around that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm just looking for where I was. All the way through this particular section, we talk about worker accommodation or minor accommodation or various types of accommodation. It occurred to me that a bed is a bed is a bed, whichever way you look at it. How come we have so many different sort of interpretations and prices, more importantly? Couldn't we standardise that and talk about beds instead of different types of accommodation?
Through the chair,
Thank you, Darren.
the categories have been established to capture the different land uses and the capacity of those land uses upon council resources. So where you've got the likes of workers' accommodation and units, they're part of a larger business operation, and therefore they have a greater capacity to have on council resources. So that is why the differential categories is to make certain that the different land uses and the capacity that they have on council resources are more equitably spread across the whole rating base.
Okay, I accept that. The thing is, in the serviced area, regardless of what the operation is, then a bed is still a bed. Now, I accept that on a mine, the mine site's responsible for the services, but surely that cuts it down to 2 rather than 5 or 6 or 7. I'm just looking at where I was reading it. So couldn't we make that as in a serviced area or a non-serviced area rather than, once again, a multiplicity?
Explain to me through the check, and just explaining when you're talking about the service area, please.
Well, the serviced area would be, say, in the townships where there's water and sewer supply.
This is
as against, say, a farm or a mine site where the farmer or the mine site would have to measure up to supplying the services.
Through the chair, this is the general rates. This is no reflection on the utility service charges. So this is just general rates.
Yeah.
Which is, so having whether in the serviced area or not is irrelevant as far as the general rates are concerned. There's always room to look at rationalisation of categories. However, that would have to be a fairly large project to look at, because you can make quite a bit of difference to individual rate paths. These categories have been developed over a period of years to help equitably spread the rate, the general rates across the rateable properties within the Shire. and it has been developed through a process where it is deemed that this is equitably spreading that rate's burden across all those various properties. So it's not something just to look at and say, let's change it down into 2 or 3. We've got to look at how that will affect it. Will there be equitable distribution of those rates across the Shire?
Okay, then why would the levy be different? I say between 0 to 50, 0 to 50 heads is X price, and 200 to 300 is another price, and it doesn't. It isn't $175 each. It can vary between $80 and $175 or $180. Well, what's the difference?
There again goes, sorry, through the chair, there again goes back to the capacity of those, someone with a larger workforce have got a greater capacity on council's resources. So there's a lot more traffic on roads, there's a lot more families around availing of council services in the towns and so forth. So that is why there's those there. Similarly, if you look at the residential banding by valuation, that helps to make sure everyone's paying an equitable amount of general rates, but without having the higher valuation properties paying substantially more. So that is how it's all being developed to try and equitably spread those general rates across the Shire.
Well, maybe I'm dumb. I can't get my head around why the price is different.
Why it's not the same each
Per bed.
per bed, yeah.
I just can't understand that. I know that there's some areas where, actually I think the serviced area as against non-serviced area argument has a place in this discussion. I can see why you're talking about, really, if it's a farm or a mine, then it's the only consideration then is traffic, because council supplies nothing else to these people. So it's wear and tear on the roads.
Through the chair, it's not just wear and tear on roads. There's be families, they will be availing themselves of different services that council provide. They'll come into town, they will use the parks, they will go to the
Community services.
Thank you.
all those sort of things. So it's not just the roads, but it's the capacity. The larger the operation, the more people within that operation, therefore the capacity to avail of council resources is higher.
In terms of continuity, are we changing this category formula around much from the previous years?
Through the chair, when we did the rates modelling, we varied a couple of categories, particularly in the residential area, as far as the banding is concerned, to try and smooth out the valuation increases and how it affects the rates. But in main, it's the same. This rating regime is much the same as it was this current financial year.
Okay. It's a discussion.
I think it's a discussion we need to have.
Going forward, a bit more clarification for a later date. Because council's very conscious of the fact that we need to not just follow say some rules and regulations or some models and templates from down south, because we're such a unique shire. So I think it's part of a workshop type position going forward that we need to totally throw the old model out and see how we deal with it in a different way.
Yeah.
But it's not for today.
No.
Through the chair, can I just ask a question there, please?
Thank you, Robin.
Daryl, I'm just wondering, like this recommendation here, does it permit the 12.86% average rateable valuations to go ahead?
This is just categories, I
Through the
believe.
chair, this is just the categories.
Yeah.
The next,
I understand it's the categories, but what I'm wondering is, I know I asked a question some time ago in relation to the categories because some of the rural properties went up considerably and some didn't go up, some went down. I know I'm just wondering whether we should be having a further discussion around, you know, the properties who are basically not going to pay any additional rates as opposed to those who are going to pay ridiculous amount of additional fees and charges and rates. Is there provision for another rating category to try and, you know, plateau that out so everyone pays something?
through the chair, Councillor Holmes, understand your question. There is nothing within the legislation that allows us to put a floor on the rates. So when we do the work to try and smooth out valuation increases that have occurred across the Shire, we're going to get a variety of things that happen in, as you pointed out, that some will pay less general rates than last year, some will pay about the same, and obviously the ones with the higher valuation increases, they'll be paying more than last year. But unfortunately, we can't put a floor on it to say you can't pay less than what you paid last year. There's nothing available in the legislation that enables us to do that. So that is just a byproduct of the work done to try and smooth the valuations out across the Shire. Because whilst the average was 12.86, some were a lot higher than that, as you pointed out.
I agree with what you're saying, Daryl, but is there provision for another rating category to capture that?
Through the chair, I think that could start getting into a bit of a legal tangle if you try to do that, because you're identifying particular properties and levying them different to properties that are the same. So say for argument's sake, you've got your rural production properties, use that as an example. You've got the category is land used or capable of being used in whole or in part for rural grazing. If you applied one rate in $1 for that, but singled out others and applied a different rate in $1, there is the possibility of a successful challenge against council, because they're the same use, but you're applying a different rate in $1 to them because the way the rate in $1 has been structured in this budget, they'll be paying less than last year.
Thank you, I understand.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Holmes. So,
through the chair, there was one other comment I wanted to make in relation to that recommendation, was that
go ahead.
We're delegating the authority to the Chief Financial Officer. However, under the acceptable request guidelines, councillors can't have a direct conversation with the CHO. So as per the delegations register, can we just leave that delegation sit with the CEO?
That's not part of the recommendation.
That's 15.5.2, isn't it?
Yeah.
The recommendation on page 25,
Yep.
and then you go over and then you got parts 2 and 3 on page 28.
Yeah.
That should be the Chief Executive Officer. Through the chair, that should be the Chief Executive Officer.
What did you say, Chief Financial?
Down the bottom.
Yeah, it does. You're right, Robin, on 20.
Oh, okay.
That's just an error,
It's
is it?
just a title.
It should be Chief Executive
I believe
Officer.
it's administrative.
Councillor.
Yeah, that's just a printing error, Councillor.
You're on it, Robin.
All right, well done.
Yeah.
So would Councillor Holmes like to move the amendment through the chair? I just to that recommendation, noting that it is an administrative error. Yes.
Councillor Holmes?
Yes, happy to do that.
Okay. Councillor Holmes moved it. A second. Councillor Hale. All those in favour of that amendment? Carried. So we'll move back to the standard motion with that recommendation to adopt those categories with that slight administrative error. A mover. Burns, seconder. Okay. Morris, all those in favour, please signify. Carried, thank you. All right, next up we've got 5.3 differential rates. So this is the actual rate amounts as listed, being the minimum differential rate. Someone have to move the table this one, please. Morris and Burns, thank you. Okay, discussion please, councillors. This incorporates what, the 5% increase?
Through the chair, this particular year, council has had a revaluation supplied by the Department of Resources. We touched on already, there's across the Shire, there's a 12.86% increase in valuation. Some of those valuation increases are considerably higher than the 12.86. So in a year when we've got a revaluation like that, it's not across the board a 5% increase or any percent increase, because you have to look at what those valuation increases have done to the individual properties and try and assist as much as you can to reduce the impact of some of those higher valuations. So the rate and the dollar and the minimums that are provided to council in this recommendation, what we have been able to do for modelling is to achieve a 91% of the rateable properties with a 5% increase or less. That is a very good result considering what has happened to valuation. So these rates in the dollar and the minimums achieve that 5% increase or less with 91% of the rateable properties within the Shire. Those with the rather high valuation increases, unfortunately, you can't smother and smooth out every instance of where valuation does increase.
Thanks, please, councillors.
Chair, so one thing I did raise earlier is I think there's a slight lack of transparency with this document. We haven't mentioned anywhere in here removal of the discount on our rates. And if you're going to do the rate rise of 5% and lose the discount, how is that going to affect our community? And that we need to discuss.
I must say, it doesn't say it in this particular report, but in the actual report of the adoption of the budget, there is reference to the discount being removed. And that was put in that document for discussion. So main reason for that is this meeting, this budget meeting is a special meeting, council, and at a special meeting you can only discuss matters that appear on the agenda. That is why we purposely put in the adoption of the budget about the removal of discount, so that would open that up for councillors to go and discuss that matter at that time.
Through the chair.
Sorry, Robin, you go.
I just wanted to mention in there that in what Daryl's saying, it provides me with not very much confidence in, going back to the community in relation to transparency. And my other concern is affordability. I mean, our communities in Cookshire are, mainly socio-economic communities. And when we take that into consideration and the work that we've done around the community plan, that the large portion of the community is 60 plus, and there's another portion that are low income earners, I'm concerned about a 5% increase across the board on average. So, and the removal of a discount. And I think we need to consider that, and especially affordability.
Other comments?
What you're saying, this is not the time to talk about the discount, talk about it later.
Through the chair, can I just make the comment that this individual report is about the differential rates. It's not about the procedure or the application of anything else that council does or doesn't apply in terms of applying a discount and how that's calculated. This specific report, if you turn to page 44 and 45, if you can just draw councillors' attention to that, is again about the rate in the dollar that is being applied to those categories. So the budget, the annual budget to be taken as a whole is made up of a range of reports that are required by legislation to be produced. Darryl has provided the information that in a later report that gives you the opportunity to then raise the question of the discounts. This particular report here is simply talking about the rate in the dollar primarily. So this is not, if I can say with respect, this is not the time to talk about the operational side of the discount. That will come in a later report, which you can adopt or change or whatever it is. So
this is basically the mechanism of keeping the 91% at around about 5%. Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
I think if councillors, if I might ask councillors to just please keep in mind that there is a statutory process that we need to follow. These reports are strictly in accordance with that statutory process, and I certainly hope that transparency has been achieved by noting your concerns on this particular issue in a later report on this agenda.
All right, thank you, CEO. Okay, so further discussion down the track, councillors. I'll put that motion recommendation to we adopt those differential rates. All those in favour, please signify. Okay, against. Councillor Hale has indicated. Do you want that recorded, Councillor Hale?
Yes. Councillor Holmes?
Councillor Holmes?
No, I'm voting against as well, thank you.
Okay. Would you like that recorded that you voted against that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, the motion's passed in the majority. With those dissenters noted, thank you. Move to 5.4. No? 5.4, yeah. 5.4, the environmental levy, separate charge for financial year. Separate charge known as the environmental levy, separate charge in the sum of $89 to be levied on equally on all rateable parcels of land. The purpose of rehabilitation and aftercare costs of council waste management facility. I'd like to move that we table this one for discussion. Thank you, Burns. Thank you, Morris. Thank you. Comments, please, councillors.
The $89, is that going into a specific pot and not to be used for anything else? Right.
Through the chair, any funds raised by separate charge can only be utilised for the purpose of which is raised.
Charge.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
This is one of those ones that we're stuck with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the state government's environmental requirements saying you have to rehabilitate, you have to provide running services, you have to do this, you have to do that. And the ratepayers are being charged for it.
Yes.
One of many. But unfortunately, I don't think we're any other way out of that. What was the charge last year? Do we know?
Increased by $4.
It's increased by $4. Okay, so I'll put that motion to the members. All those in favour of that recommendation, please indicate. That's carried. Councillor Holmes?
Yes, I'm in favour of that, thanks.
Thank you. Carried. 5.5, waste operations separate charge. Per parcel of rateable land is $32 per annum, increased by $2 from the previous year. Somebody like to move we table this one, please. We have Desmond and Logan. Any comment, councillors?
It's really just a question. I see the state government's going to drop the waste levy management next year, and that's going to fall back onto us. Have we got any idea of what it's going to cost us? It's between, they estimate between $75 and a couple $100 per household, which the local government's going to have to collect. This is something that's been brought up at the law things. No, and I just see it here now, and I just wondered if you've even thought about what it might be.
Through the chair, I'd have to take that question.
Yeah, there's a notice, Chair. Yeah.
I understood, and I might be wrong, once again to the chair, that the waste levy is on commercial waste.
Oh, is this on commercial waste?
Yeah, it's not on private.
It's not on private waste. Oh, sorry. I thought it was in general. No. Yeah, no. I stand corrected.
Thanks, councillors. I'll put that motion. Members are in favour of that recommendation, please indicate. Councillor Holmes?
Yes, I'm in favour of that, thank you.
Unanimously, thank you. 5.6 is the Cameron Creek Rural Electrification Scheme. Special charge. We're all familiar with this one. Would somebody like to move the table this, please, for consideration? Morris and Logan. Any discussion, councillors?
Other than thank
Yes,
God
Rick.
it's not far from an end.
Yes, councillor Holmes?
Through the chair, I'm just wondering if there's been any subdivisions in the last 12 months in that area.
Just through the chair, no, Robin, as far as we know, the levy is recalculated once a subdivision has been approved. So we always calculate the levy with the information that we have to hand.
Thank you.
So through the chair, so when the subdivision does happen, it all gets recalculated and the amount that everyone pays is a little bit less.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
The levy is calculated to ensure that those that are benefiting from the power are contributing to the cost of that, the repayment of the cost.
They're getting power too, yeah. Okay.
That's through the chair. That's a question Darryl might be able to answer. How far can we apply benefited area?
Councillor, we're sort of straying off a little bit there.
Yeah.
Sorry, off the agenda. I know where you're going. And I think it's an opportunity going forward as well.
Okay.
That we do need to keep on track. Councillor, there's a recommendation there in 4 parts. I'll put that motion. All those in favour of that recommendation, please indicate. Carried. Robin?
Yes, I'm in favour, thank you.
Thank you. Carried. 5.7, the Rural Fire Brigade special charge for the financial year. With the recommendation that we charge those.
Through the chair, can I just make a comment?
Just a moment, Councillor, please. First of all, we'll get this on the table. Do we have a mover to put this on the table? We have Hale and Morris. Okay, over to you. Thank you, Councillor Holmes.
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to double check that I didn't have a conflict of interest in this area because I'm in the Martin Rural Fire Brigade area.
Councillor, through the chair, the adoption of the annual budget is an ordinary business matter under the legislation, and so councillors typically do not have a conflict of interest. If you would like that noted and you want to leave the meeting for that purpose or not participate in the vote, you may do so. I'm
happy. I kind of agreed with what you were saying, but I just wanted to confirm that it was ordinary council business.
Yeah, thank you. Look, it's noted, and thanks for bringing that up, Councillor Holmes. But yeah, I think you can be safe that we're just in normal council business. Councillors, there has been a replacement report given to you. You should have that separately. 5.7.
Yes.
Now, the mover and seconder, are you happy that we adopt this second replacement report?
Yes.
Hale and Morris. Okay, so we're looking at that, that special report. And for those, excuse me, the sake of those online, yeah, would you just like to very briefly, succinctly tell us what the difference between what's
Councillors, there were just a couple of updates that needed to be included. One was at the time of writing the report, we had not received a written application from the Poison Creek Rural Fire Brigade. We believe that the Poison Creek Rural Fire Brigade will submit an application, but have they submitted? They have submitted an application. So the position we took was to insert the words subject to a receipt of a written application prior to the 22nd of June, that's prior to this meeting, just to be absolutely clear. And that appears in the recommendation as well. And the second was that the Rossville Rural Fire Brigade had requested an increase of 100% in their fee, rising from their levy, rising from $25 to $50. And at the time of writing the report, that information was not immediately to hand. We had received it, but it hadn't been noted at the time. So we wanted to make those two administrative corrections. The addition of the $50, the extra $50 has taken the Rossville Rural Fire Brigade from approximately 3,400 collected to 6,850 collected. Council does not receive any benefit from this. We are simply a facilitator of this money for the state government.
But do we remit this money to those specific projects?
Yes. We take no money from it.
Yeah.
We simply act as a post box, councillor, where we get the money in, receive the levy, and we put the money out. But it is subject to council's resolution that you're happy with those, with the application for the fees. It is not a given. It is up to council to agree.
comments, please, councillors, on this?
Yes, through the chair, CEO, do they have to quit this?
Sorry?
Do the local fire brigade people have to quit?
I believe they do, councillor, but that's a state government issue. No, I don't think so. Oh, they do acquit it to us? Sorry, I beg your pardon. Correction. They do acquit it to us.
Okay, and then we have to go back to the government with it or not? That's it, end of story.
We don't go back to the government. I would just make a comment that there are observations from time to time that that money does not necessarily get used within the community. And I'm not saying that from the Rural Fire Brigade's perspective, I'm saying from the state government's perspective. So it's not relevant to this discussion, but to answer your question, yes, we act as the post box.
Okay, so through the chair, we're not sure why Rossville has doubled.
Do our rates officer as well.
So, through the chair, they have to, when they put their submissions in, they supply us with a yearly plan and a 3-yearly plan. Part of their 3-yearly plan from last year was to buy new equipment, and they actually had to do an asset audit for that. They did that last year. This year they'll actually be buying the new equipment, which is why it's been increased. Okay. So next year when they put the submission in, money can return back to $25.
Right, so they've obviously done community consultation with the line out there to let them know. I would assume so. Okay, I hope so. Yes. Okay.
No, that's probably just answered the question that I was going to ask, is why they're all different amounts. And something Councillor Holmes brought up this morning is they have other grants available to them. So the question was why they're all different amounts.
Well, that would be the amount of people that are within the areas, I would be guessing.
It's a range of things. Councillors, if I can just say through the chair, if you're not familiar with this process, it is standard across all councils.
Yes. Okay.
For this charge to be proposed, if you like, and for councils to take on this role. So again, this is another one of the agenda items that is specified by the local government regulation that we need to follow.
But very, very rightfully so, Dale. If we're sending out a notice to collect money from our ratepayers, we need to be happy that the money is used for appropriate purpose. The important point just made then was community consultation by the rural fireys with their own people to basically support that ask.
So it's only on the, like in Rossville's case, it's only on the Rossville fire area. They have to pay the extra $50.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Through the chair, if I can just also add, what part of the process is these rural fire brigades have to provide council with their audited financial statements as well. So that gives another layer of accountability and other those.
Robin, are you happy with that?
Well, I'm just a little bit concerned about the $50 for Rossville. I mean, the fees haven't really increased from last year for the others, but I haven't seen any community consultation around that. And I'm just wondering, is there a provision for council to recoup, you know, the cost of invoicing?
Sorry?
Through the chair, no. The answer to the second part of your question is the provisions for council to recoup the cost. It is one we have talked often about, community service obligations. So for us, it is just a means of providing support to the rural fire brigades through the collection of those levies to be able to support them with their business. And
so Heather, when they send in those reports, requesting, you know, these levies, is there any reason why those reports aren't attached so the councillors can see the background of it all and what they're asking for? And, you know, if you're looking at their financials, you can see whether they've actually applied or attempted to apply for any grant. Probably more around the Rossville ones, you know, have they accessed any of those available grants? And if they have, that's fine, but why are they asking for, you know, the increase that they're asking for?
Did you not hear what Andrea
No,
just
she probably
You maybe didn't hear Andrea then.
I didn't, no, sorry.
Hang on, Andrea's just coming over now to tell you.
Sorry, Robin. When they said they put the submissions in, they actually need to supply us with a 12-month and a 3-month plan of what they're actually going to spend the money on. So last year when they submitted their 3-year plan, they had to do an asset audit on what they wanted, new equipment that they wanted to purchase. This year they're actually going to purchase that equipment, which is why they've increased the levy from $25 to $50. So when they purchase the equipment next year, they'll probably drop it back down to $25.
Which is fine, but councillors haven't seen that information. You know, what I'm asking for is, can we see that information?
Yeah, through the chair, we can supply that information for you to see.
And the reason I ask that is through their grant processes, they're entitled to apply for their equipment to be grant funded, you know, slip-on units, and there's, you know, firefighting equipment. There's a whole raft of stuff, and some of it is, you know, fairly expensive. So that's why I'm asking, you know, the basis of their request, for the basis of their request.
Through the chair, I'm not 100% sure on what they actually are going to spend that money on. They actually don't tell us that, but I'm sure through the rural QFES, part of it and part of them actually getting this levy, that there are rules and regulations about what they can actually spend that money on.
And I totally agree with that. But what I'm saying is they have access to grant funding to be able to purchase equipment. But if they want council to increase their levy, they need to be able to provide some justification to the councillors who are making that decision to increase that, you know, funding to, you know, 100%.
Just through the chair, I understand, Robin. We wouldn't be able to attach that because the adoption of the budget is so heavily regulated, and in the Act it actually tells us which reports we have to put up, in which order, those sorts of things. We can certainly provide that information to councillors, but not as an attachment to the report, which then forms part of the budget. I'm not sure where we go from here now. I have noted for a future workshop to actually explain to councillors the full process and provide that information.
As far as our,
Yes, thank you.
as far as community consultation goes, I mean, I'd be happy if we could be assured that there has been adequate community consultation down there, and the community down there who are being charged are happy with the increase. But you know, are we just taking one person's word for it down there, or do we know from a?
Well, I know Rossville is a very close-knit community, and they all do talk a lot at the marketplace, and they do have a lot of community consultation. So I would believe that they would have consulted with their community down there.
I'm sure they know about it. I don't know, but I specifically.
I mean, I can follow that up.
Sorry, through the chair. Part of their submission is they actually must also supply us with a copy of their annual general minutes, where they actually do discuss and vote on the increase that they're actually going to ask council for.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Holmes?
It's gone.
Sorry, no, I'm still here. I'm in favour of the fire levy, but I'm not in favour of increasing Rossville to $50 without something supporting it.
Again, Andrew's just told us that they've actually mentioned it in their meeting minutes, that it's been discussed and basically approved by the people down there.
Oh, I understand that, and I know Martin Rule had those annual general meetings, but there might be 6 people that go to those meetings.
Well, yeah, I think we can only, you know, dig in so far and have to just take it that they're a responsible group themselves.
Through the chair, I'd just like to say that the choice is that councillors can not approve the application. The consequence of that would be clearly, according to the brigade's information that they've provided, they would not then be able to buy at this stage the capital gear that they need to run the brigade. So we do take a certain amount of information on trust that the brigade that is so supportive of the community needs the equipment, and this is what they believe they need to do. If council does not approve that, they cannot levy the community that additional $25. Yes. So
they are a very proactive group down there.
And that is open to council. That's why this recommendation, the recommendation from officers is this. However, if you wish to change the recommendation, you're welcome to do that. And the levy can remain at $25 or a different amount if you want.
I can follow up more down there as well now that it's the local community.
Yeah, we can follow up on it.
Yes.
I'm pretty well satisfied that it wouldn't happen down there without everyone knowing.
Without everyone knowing about it, yes. Yeah. And they did have that terrible big fire that did a lot of damage down there, so they would all be.
They'll be after something specific, I'm sure. Yeah, but I'm satisfied.
Okay. Look, in that case, I'm going to put that motion that we accept that, to adopt that recommendation. All those in favour, please signify. Councillor Holmes?
If Councillor Burns is happy, I'm going to take his advice on board and vote in favour of it.
Thank you very much. That's passed. Okay, 5.8 wastewater charges for the financial year. A recommendation there in terms of the list. 163, 64, 65. Somebody like to make the table this one, please. Burns, and seconder, please. Desmond. All right, discussion, councillors, please.
Now, this is just putting everything in the categories again for the various. That's right, differential.
Through the chair, the wastewater charges and other utility charges are based on the strike occupation of property.
Yeah.
So the actual rate has been increased by 5%. And then these are just the calculations of those various charges against those prescribed occupations.
So when you say, through the chair, Darryl, when you say accommodation in page 64, through all of it really. Accommodation top line per room, site without facilities and site with facilities. So the difference there, meaning without and with what?
Through the chair, those with facilities, they would be referring to cooking facilities.
Okay.
So, you know, if you look at it as a without facilities, it's just like a straight motel room.
Right.
You've got no ability to cook, to generate further waste.
Okay.
And with facilities, that's where you do have your kitchenettes and the capacity to generate further waste.
Okay, thank you.
It's pretty obvious that the big ones are schools and hospitals.
Yeah.
And licensed clubs and pubs and taverns.
So places that are, you know, accommodation places that are not operating, they still get charged.
Yep.
Yeah. Through the chair, it's always on the prescribed occupation of the property. So if the property is a accommodation premises, even if it's not operating, it's still accommodation premises. Therefore, that is a prescribed occupation of the property, and those are the charges that would apply.
Any further discussion?
Through the chair.
Thank you, Robin.
Through the chair, Daryl. Could you just tell me what a tourist attraction is and under this definition?
Oh, yes, there you are.
Through the chair, I have to default to Andrew on that one. I just don't know the charge as well enough, I'm sorry.
Andrea's coming to the table, Robin.
Through the chair, the tourist attraction in this case basically applies to like the Quinkin Centre at Laura. So anything that would be like that, where they've actually got
The museum? The museum?
Museum.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's quite broad, actually. Tourist attraction.
Yes, you could use that to your advantage or someone's disadvantage if you wanted to.
Councillors, I'm going to put that motion to the members. All those in favour of that recommendation to adopt those charge units in charge amounts, please indicate. Carried. Councillor Holmes?
Yes, in favour.
Thank you. 5.9 is water charges for the financial year. Somebody like to move the table this for consideration? Burns and Morris. Thank you. Any clarification required there, councillors?
Through the chair, just a question in relation to consumption charges. Down the bottom, in the bottom of paragraph 2, it just identifies Cowan, Cooktown, Lakeland and Laura water areas, and it doesn't include Rossville or Ayton. Is there any reason behind that?
We don't.
Through the chair, I don't think we have reticulated water at Rossville and Ayton.
No, we don't.
It's only where we have a treatment plant that supplies reticulated water that we charge for it.
No worries, thank you. Is that because they're on bore water down there?
Or a tank, yeah.
More water and tanks.
Nickel Creek.
Creek.
All right, if there's no other clarification needed, I'll put that motion to members. All those in favour of that recommendation, please signify. Carried. Councillor Holmes?
Thank you, yeah.
Okay. Motion's passed. 5.10 curbside collection charges for financial year. With a recommendation on page 82. I'd like to move that we table this one. Please, we have Morris and Burns. Any discussion, clarification needed there, councillors?
just one question. Why is there a difference between the waste collection charges at 8 Bloomfield and that versus Cooktown, Law and Cowan and Laura and that they're all the same? Yeah, it's half. Half that.
Through the chair, that's,
Thank you, Darren.
my understanding is the collection there is on a fortnightly basis, not a weekly basis.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right, sorry. Okay.
No, that's a fair comment.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that was, Phil scratched their head to that one.
Any further clarification required, councillors?
I did send a question through just asking how much it was for the past financial year for an annual charge for each of those locations.
Have you got that handy, Janice?
Off the top of my head, I think the weekly one was 482 and the
Fortnightly.
it was half, so 121. Yeah.
So it's only got a couple of dollars.
It's
is what
only
you're
got
saying.
a couple of dollars, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll put that motion, we adopt that recommendation. All those in favour, please signify. Carried, thank you. Robin?
Yes, in favour, thank you.
Councillors, we're going to just break for 15 minutes and have a quick morning tea, coffee to keep our minds going. Those online, we'll just break for 15 minutes. We'll be back in at 10:15. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned for that time. Okay, thanks, councillors, and staff, we're back into session. Thanks to those online for anybody joining us. We're on item 5.11. Robin, are you back in yet?
Lewis is just going to read it.
Councillor Hayes is joining us by Zoom, so we're just trying to get it back online.
Which one did you say, Mr. Mayor? 5.11, did you say?
Yes, 5.11. Oh, you're not interesting. Interest on outstanding rates and charges. We can move forward with the mover and second of the table. This one, council. Something like that. Burns and Logan. Thank you. Obviously, this one pertains to the interest rate that we charge for people who go over the due date. Is there any discussion around that? We're looking at a rate 8.303% per annum. How'd you come up with that actual rate, 8.03?
Through the chair's legislated, what it is we've used the bank bill rate that's published on the RBA site in March, and you can add 8% to that, so it's a maximum rate that you can apply.
Okay.
So you use the bank, say that again, you use the bank?
Bill it's published on the Reserve Bank of Australia's website for March in the year prior to the year you're doing the budget, so March 21.
Okay.
And it was only 0.03%, so it's nothing actually. Okay.
And you add 8%.
Yeah.
The legislation allows you to add up to 8%. That's the maximum rate that can be applied.
I was talking to Rainbow the other day, he was trying to get finance from a bank. First mortgage not available, second mortgage. First mortgage around about that 3%. Second mortgage about 8%. Third mortgage in excess of 20%. Means it's only 20% of the credit card rate. Credit card rate. Yeah. It's not about adage in banking and finance, the higher the rate, the higher the risk, or versus the other way, the higher the risk, the higher the rate. Yeah. So they're still making a good quid out there, I think. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Councillors, I'll put that motion. I think that we adopt the recommendation to have that rate of 8.03%. All those in favour, please signify. Councillor Holmes, you online?
Yes, and I'm agreeing with that. Thank you.
Thank you. That's passed unanimously. Thank you. 5.12 is rate notice levy and payment. Okay, so it's primarily, this is a half-yearly charge, and the people have got 30 days from the date of issue for the rate notice to pay their bill. Someone like to leave the table this one? Morrison Hale, thank you. Is there any clarification required around that, councillors?
Through the chair, may I just
thank you, Darren.
Change slightly from previous years. In previous years, the actual date would be nominated as when rate notices were issued. I believe that can lead to problems if there was something that prevented council from issuing on that day.
No.
So that is why it is recommended that this year that they'll notice that the first lot of notices will be issued August, September, and the second lot of notices February, March. So it's not an actual date. However, leeway should something beyond our control, the council's control, come that we can't issue it on a precise date. And that's why that has changed.
Discussion.
That was prudent. Have you got any concerns with this one?
Mr. Mayor, through the chair, no, not so much concerns about the principle of it. only thing that concerns me, and I know a number of other councillors, is that constantly people's costs are going up. The households have to budget. Is there a necessity here for a means whereby they can enter into a monthly automatic bank transfer to their rates account to make it a little easier, make budgeting easier? Through the chair,
as long as the rates are paid, I'll start. If someone received their rate notice and they're unable to pay by the due date, they can approach council and enter into an arrangement to pay. And we generally look at that, having that 6 months notice paid, so the first one's by the end of December and the second one by the end of June, so it's paid within that period. The interest rate will apply to those outstanding payments until they're paid. But there's certainly nothing stopping individual ratepayers automating a process through their bank to pay X amount into their rates, and can actually be in advance of their rates. They can do that, certainly. And a lot of people who have experienced difficulty in the past in paying by the due date, set up a repayment arrangement and then continue with that, so that they get in advance and they don't have to pay the additional interest over a period of time that it take to catch up.
So do they get in touch with council first and then organise it that way, or do they get in touch with, what you're saying, get in touch with their bank? How does that work?
Just through the chair, we already have a number of our ratepayers that make periodic payments against their rate, so it certainly is a system that is currently operating within council. We have a number of ratepayers that pay fortnightly, weekly, monthly, depending on their individual circumstances. So it is just a matter of the ratepayers contacting council, and we can, it does carry an administrative burden if council sets it up, but there's nothing to stop ratepayers, as you would with any other of your bills, setting up a direct debit from your bank account. We accept payment however people want to pay.
Okay, the other comment, I guess, is the interest charge is directed at truant ratepayers. Maybe they're not in advance if they're paying on a fortnightly or monthly basis, but is it unreasonable to charge them 8.303% interest on something that they've set up so that they are paying their rates? I understand what Daryl's saying about being in advance. I wasn't talking about discounts, I was only meaning the interest charge.
Through the chair, if the ratepayer's been in contact with council, our advice is always to structure the payment to make sure that they are always in advance, so that that interest isn't charged to them. If there's a reason why a ratepayer isn't able to pay their rates on time, they can certainly apply to council under our hardship policy to have an arrangement made. But ordinarily, just because someone's on a payment plan doesn't necessarily negate the application of the interest if the rates are overdue.
Okay, so through the chair then, if you're under the hardship policy, you're still going to be charging them 8.03% when they're already finding it hard.
No, I think you're saying they wouldn't. Is that what you're saying?
So if they haven't paid their rates in full, say something's come up, family funeral, whatever, and through the hardship application, are you still going to charge 8.03% on top, even though they're already finding it hard?
Hardship applications are on a case-by-case basis, so
I understand.
it would depend on the circumstances. My understanding is under the policy we can choose not to charge interest. Yeah, just checking with Andrea. But it is, a case-by-case basis. But there is some flexibility there for genuine need. I think it's important for councils to know, the intention is really to be supportive of the community, and we don't want anybody to be disadvantaged significantly because of decisions that council make in regard to the rates. So there are structures and systems in place to try and make that as easy as we can for our ratepayers.
My concern is that if people are purposely budgeting on a fortnightly or monthly basis because of their inability to be a year in advance, in other words, if they by the rule of law here, they've got to be a year in, or they've got to be in advance to dodge the interest payment. Unless, as you say, the organisation decides not to charge it. So what I'm saying is that people who need to be on a pay-by-pay scheme to pay their rates, basically what you're saying to me is if they're not a year in advance, which they can't afford to do, then they're going to get charged the interest rate.
If they're on a payment scheme, unless they're behind when they start, they should always be, you know, if you start paying your rates on the 1st of January, by the time that the rates are actually due at the end of June, you would expect that you would be in advance of where your rates are. So we would, as I said earlier, on a case-by-case basis, we would talk to people and provide them the advice of this is what the direct payments would need to look like to ensure that you are in advance.
Yeah, well, that's why I asked the question, should we be offering to all a plan whereby they can enter into agreement and because, you know, at the end of the year, come up with, if you've got to come up with $2,500 for your rates and charges, it's a fair club.
Now, say through the chair, councillor, that is in existence already.
Yeah.
I think what I'm taking from what you're saying is this could be a good point that we could publicise for further the community.
Yes.
So as Heather was saying, like any bill, you can pay off your electricity bill in advance, you can pay off all sorts of things in advance. So a fair position is if you are starting from a position of no debt, no outstanding debts, and at the end of the first month you pay $50 or $200 or whatever it might be, or per quarter, that is available to everybody now. So that's a way of allowing people to budget over their year according to their financial circumstances. If they are suffering hardship, then as the director is saying, on a case-by-case basis, their hardship application will be considered, and we have council policies in place for that. If they simply don't pay their rates, it is fair enough, like any other bill, council cannot carry the cost of that. We still need to run, and if they don't want to pay, certainly 8% is a lot cheaper than 20% on their credit card. So, and this, you know, those options are there already. I feel very confident that we've got a suite of policies and options that are available, but I'd like to take on board, maybe we can advertise that more and say this is how you go about setting up a periodic payment to council. We have that facility available, and we absorb the cost, as the director is saying, of that administration, because we want to encourage people to be able to live comfortably as comfortably as they can.
Yes, so we can put it out through our media.
We can do that.
We need a standard format one though. The administration doesn't want a multitude of different agreements.
There doesn't have to be an agreement. It's just they identify this is my payment towards this rates number and just pay it. It's not an agreement where you have to enter into a payment plan or anything like that. That would be a situation if rates were already overdue. Then you enter into a payment plan to be able to recover your rates.
I wasn't talking about truants. I was meaning the people who really need to budget because times are getting tougher and tougher. Costs are going up and up and up and up.
So we might publicise that more, and I think there's a number of really good suggestions that are coming out of this or observations where we've got something in place, but we need to put it in lines.
Okay, getting back on track, we're talking about when it's leveraged and that grace period to pay those. I'll put that motion to the members. We adopt that recommendation in two parts. All those in favour, please signify. Okay. Councillor Holmes?
Oh, yes, I'm in favour, thank you.
513 is a pensioner concession for the financial year. Council rebate of 20%, capped at a maximum of 200. The state government rebate of 20%, capped at a maximum of 200. Would someone like to move we table this one, please? A couple of pensioners, Marilyn Morris, Councillor Morris and Councillor Logan. Thank you. Any discussion around this?
It's the same as previous years. That's what I thought.
So it's 200 plus 200?
That there's, if they meet all the criteria.
Yes. I see the and or there. So okay.
It's where they might necessarily, if you see in the body of the report, it talks about them having a certificate of occupancy. If they don't have that, then they would not be eligible for councils.
I see, but the
concession.
state government one they would be.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other queries, councillors?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll put that motion that councillors adopt that recommendation. All those in favour, please signify. Carry. Councillor Holmes?
Yes, in favour, thank you.
That's unanimous, thank you. 514 is a statement of estimated financial position. Is this something new?
Through the chair, this is a standard report that must be adopted in the budget.
Okay. All right, I just haven't seen it so stated like this before. Not that I remember. Can somebody like to move the table this one just for consideration? Burns and Desmond, thank you. All right, queries or comment around this one, councillors?
No.
So in a number, it's just saying our financial position or the government, or when we're looking at other arrangements, like it says disaster recovery, they obviously use this number, do they? Or
Through the chair, this report is in the legislation, council has to present a report to its budget meeting to forecast where they will believe they will be at the 30th of June of the current budget. So this report is saying that the revised budget had a deficit of 8.495 million, and from the information that we had in preparing this report, we forecast that the result could be a deficit of $9.9 million. And in that report, there's an explanation as to some of the key factors that attributed to that weren't necessarily known earlier in time.
Now, that first point there with the DFRA funding said that with salary, claiming DFRA funding for salary was an $800,000 shortfall. Is that back into capital, or is it, I mean, have we lost that altogether, or is it just an accounting type differentiation between?
Through the chair, with the DFRA, the submissions are worked out as to what it's going to cost council to do the rectification work on the DFRA. And offsetting that is the revenue that council will get from DFRA. Basically, they will nil each out. In this instance, the salaries were budgeted to be 1.45 million, but that amount of work wasn't achieved. And at the time of this report, there was only 590,000 there. So in the forecast, we have to estimate that there's less revenue by $861,000 that council will receive. Hence the larger than expected deficit.
What's the main reason for that? Is it a timing issue? Is it an amount of work that didn't eventuate, or? I mean, that's a fair old whack.
It was the way in which the budget was originally set up, Mr. Moore. So, unfortunately, there was an estimate for salaries, but there was not what do you call it, like complementary consideration in the budget for the capital input, the submission funding. So it was really, I suppose, an error in the budget. The reality is there has not been anything more charged other than the 589 in terms of staff salaries. We haven't done the other work yet. Those submissions have not been approved yet, but it had not appeared in the budget. So this is just explaining why there is that shortfall. It's not that things weren't approved or anything like that, not at all. It was just the way in which the budget was set up.
that we have to be pretty careful with our forward estimates like everybody else.
Yeah. It wasn't an inaccurate statement to do with the estimate. It was that the staff day labour was included, but the revenue from the approved submissions was not included. So they didn't cancel each other out.
So is, through the chair, is that redeemable or recoverable?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's just an explanation as to why the numbers look like that.
Yeah.
It's not, there's nothing substantive in it at all. It was just the way in which the budget was originally presented. This estimate of 1.45 should not have been included in the way that it was in the original budget.
So through the chair, Linda, can I just ask how we're going to correct this moving forward to bring that deficit back? Because I think last year the forecast was 5.372 for the deficit.
Yeah, Councillor Holmes, I'm very happy to answer this through the chair. There is largely a timing issue. We have currently sitting with QRA $9.5 million worth of submissions which remain to be finalised. So we are expecting any day now, and I'm hopeful that prior to the 30th of June, we will have at least several $1 million more of submissions approved by QRA. We're waiting on confirmation that those submissions have been finally approved and on the final amounts. So I am expecting at this stage that our end of year position, as at the 30th of June, will certainly be better than our forecast position. But the truth is, at the moment, we have to report on exactly the numbers that are available to us and exactly the confirmation of money that we have in. The other aspect of this is not just DRFA, but it is also the grant funding that we have received. So councillors will recall that when the COVID Works for Queensland was announced, we had to complete a raft of works in essentially less than 12 months and have them completed by the 30th of June this year. And also then the local roads and community infrastructure phase 1 program came in, and initially we had to have those completed as well. Now, the reality is everybody knows that many councils have been lobbying to have those dates extended because of the shortage of trades and the difficulty of getting imported materials from China, the cost of steel that has gone up by at least 20%, etc. So what will largely affect our end of year position will be, again, the timing of those, the completion of those works and the way in which they are all accounted for. So the next 2 or 3 months is going to be quite interesting. We have some extensions of time from the state government in terms of the COVID Works for Queensland through until September. But I believe that by the end of September, when all that work is completed, that this position will be a different position. I hope that answers your question. Councillor Holmes?
I understand the Works for Queensland is state and the DRFA is federal, but I'm a little bit concerned about the wages component because I'm pretty sure that we had discussion about mitigating the risk in relation to the DFRA. So I'm a bit confused about how we could attribute day labour and put it under DFRA.
Councillor, several years ago the rules changed essentially, and day labour is an eligible expense for councils. Now, you might remember the Productivity Commission back in 2015 and the changed circumstances around the allocation of day labour to DRFA. So I can say that absolutely it is an eligible expense when working on approved submissions and approved scope of work from QRA.
Okay, councillors, look, that's obviously a little bit of a fluid type figure. It's just something we have to give at a point in time. So there's a recommendation there that we receive that statement of financial operations, financial position of the council. and note its contents. I'll put that motion to the members. All those in favour, please signify. Carried. Councillor Holmes?
I'm going to have my voted as against, Peter. I'm a little bit confused about it.
All right, thanks, councillor. All right, next up, councillors, we've got the adoption of the budget for the financial year, which incorporates the income, the financial position, cash flows, changes in equity, capital works program, long-term financial forecast, asset management strategy, revenue statement, revenue policy, relevant measures of financial sustainability, and rates and charges change as a percentage. Would someone like to move to table this, please, for discussion? Councillor Burns and seconder, Morris, thank you. Okay, councillors, open for discussion. Go for it.
Who wants to start?
Ladies
First. I will keep on advocating for the discount being put back in. There is a discount given and an amount. And
What sort of basis? Percentage, amount?
amount, yeah.
An amount.
An amount, yes. Make it $100. And that goes, that's across the board would be just my first thought on that one, yeah. And across the board amount, which does, it does take down the amount that we were hoping to gain from taking the discount away, yes, but I feel that it is something that with all these extra increases for people, that would be something to make them still realise they're getting a little bit of something back.
Just a question to you, Andrea. The pensioners, if we allow a discount, does that apply to pensioners as well? Yes. It does.
I'll go along with Marilyn on this one. Yeah, I mean, from what I've heard of consumer sort of response to the draft budget, there is acceptance of costs. Costs have gone up in many respects, and so they're aware of the rate going up, but the discount is a bit of pill too far for a lot of people. So I would agree we need to absorb a little bit and give a bit back. Yeah. $100 sounds pretty reasonable to me, rather than a percentage. I think a percentage is too difficult to work out. Really.
Okay, other comments, councillors? Comments from other councillors?
I think, through the chair, can I ask the question at the bottom of page 103, it says here, expenditure of 72.5, resulting in an operating deficit of 9.6. Isn't that a projected operating deficit? We're locking in 9.6.
Well, that's
Through the chair, councillors, this is that the budget is a forecast.
Projected, okay.
Yeah.
So that goes without saying, we don't have to spell it out.
That's correct. But the budget, we haven't got a crystal ball to know exactly how the year's going to come out. This is the budget on how we think the operating result will be.
Okay, thank you. I agree with the $100 discount.
It's paper. It's simple too then. It's just looking at percentages.
Councillor Holmes, would you like to comment on that?
I agree with the $100 discount, but I have some questions around statement of comprehensive income. I know previously I've asked about the variances in employee benefits with the materials and services. I mean, this is a very broad statement, and I know we've workshopped things, but I've asked about employee expenses and for them to be broken down, and the response I've originally got was, you know, largely they're grant funded, but I haven't seen what component is grant funded, what's salaries and what's contract. And I've asked that question a number of times and I haven't got a response to that. So I'm still a bit confused about that. And if our deficit's going out to 9.6 million, I'd like to see, you know, what savings we're making, because I'm in here when you read this. The other thing is that we've only allocated 400,000 to rural road maintenance. So, you know, our infrastructure part of it is an essential part of it. I think we're going to have to look at, you know, community services. We're going to have to look at the frills and cut back on it all. There needs to be some savings found so there can be some more money put into infrastructure.
So, a specific question there, Robin, you want to ask of staff?
Well, I've asked for, in relation to employee benefits, you know, what's the breakdown of employee benefits?
Through the chair, Councillor Holmes, are you looking at that as per directorate? Or what's included in that total cost? So I can tell you in round figures, on a directorate basis, infrastructure make up approximately 50%, 51% of our employee benefit costs. Organisational business services make up 33% roughly, executive services are 3%, and community economy and innovation are 13% of the total employee benefit costs. Is that the information that we're looking for, or did you want to know?
Well, what part of it is grant funded? What part of the employee benefits, like the wages and salaries, is grant funded? What part of it is just wages and salaries that are absorbed by council? You know, what's the wage component, the tax component, and the superannuation component? And this is what I've been asking for. So, you know, how many people do we have on contract? Looking at those sort of things. And I simply don't know. You know, the other day we spoke about the budget for Nature's Powerhouse, and I think your response was it's commercial in confidence. Well, how am I don't know how I'm supposed to pass a budget if I don't understand everything.
Councillor, there's quite a lot in these questions. I will say, first of all, and make a public statement that every council expense in terms of salary is in fact grant funded. If you look at the situation that this council is 82% grant funded, if in simple terms we take the money which is paid by our ratepayers and attribute that to meeting the shortfall in the cost of providing water, sewage and cleansing services, every other aspect of council's operations is grant funded. Everything, absolutely everything. Council staff, contractors, council laws expenses, all other training expenses, any administrative costs, it comes out of a combination of state and federal grant funding. The financial assistance grant, as councillors know, is largely, it's untied and we can use it in any way we want, and it roughly equates to the cost of supporting the staff administration. So the first answer is everything is grant funded. This council, unlike most councils, would not survive because we don't have enough own source revenue. The other point I'd like to make in terms of salaries, which we have presented to councillors previously, not salaries, in terms of costs and the number of staff, we are the fourth lowest council of approximately 40 odd Category 1 councils in the state, with the lowest staff to operating budget ratio, and we have the largest shire in Queensland. So I think they're important components, if I can say, to remember when we're looking at trying to analyse a breakdown of superannuation costs, grant funded costs and so forth. So I'm not quite sure where councillors want to go with this. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I would say, and I do recall a conversation about Nature's Powerhouse, just to be absolutely correct, it is not that we do not want the councillors to understand precisely what individual staff are earning. We do not want to live stream individual staff salaries to the community, because it is not that operational matter, and the privacy issues of staff salaries at Nature's Powerhouse is not something that is appropriate for publication. Certainly somebody can put in a request and find out what it is. but it's probably not a discussion that should happen in a public meeting like this to analyse a particular staff person's salary.
Yes, there's a lot to this report that we're looking at now. Another real consideration the council had is this 5% increase. Would you like to discuss that or ask a question there? Councillor Holmes, you had concern around that 5%?
Yes, I'm not in favour of a 5% increase, as I said before. It's around affordability. And I think that we need to find some savings in other areas. And I think one of the things that we mentioned before is, you know, the dump point. You know, there's opportunities for revenue, and I think we've got to capture that. And if we basically put our rates up to a point where it's not affordable, then where's it going to lead us to?
Yeah, I agree with Robin, and I think I made it pretty clear before. I don't agree with 5% increase, and I was really worried about the discount. I still feel there is a problem with transparency because for one of our community members to look for where the discount is in here and how much the discount was, and then if they're actually smart enough to go, okay, the discount was, what was it before?
Through the chair was 10%,
10%.
Maximum of $300.
So 10% discount, then you're going to raise it by 5%, that's 15%. And then, you know, so I feel like we're ripping the guts out of our community. But, yeah, I've made that pretty clear myself.
We have, I think, discussed the 10%. That looks like, not the 10%, the $100 discount, that looks like coming back in. But is it worthwhile, that 5%, Darryl gave us a bit of a discussion before about how it's 5%, some up, some down, so that's like an average. Do we need to go over that again? Or?
Well, there's one thing I do worry about, and we're talking about the differential rating before, and say, okay, land trusts. Have we looked at how some of the land trusts are actually already, or not just land trusts, there's a lot of people already in arrears. What's their rates going to go up by? I do know that some of them between 12 and 16%, and they're already in the red. So how are we going to be able to, and you cannot get, you can't use Aboriginal land as agriculture. Half the lots aren't big enough, and we've had these discussions a number of times, Mr. Mayor. So they can't make money to pay their rates, but we're going to put their rates up 16% and no discount.
Yeah.
So how are those people ever going to get ahead?
Dr. Kelly?
Yeah, just through the chair, I actually spoke with our land tenure officer about this very issue just yesterday. And we have had a look. There's two things to remember. Well, council we can't identify individual properties and set rates accordingly, so it's really tricky. We have identified a couple of properties and probably the same properties, Councillor Hale, that you're referring to, that council are already in negotiations and having some discussions with, so that will continue post the adoption of the budget and the new rate rises about how and they're both very complex, as you would be aware. There's a lot of complexities around that is greater than just their inability to meet their rates burden. So they're quite complex discussions, but we did, and it was an exercise that was happening with those very concerns in mind to just make sure that we were aware of those that were potentially going to be quite disadvantaged and need a bit more additional support from council.
Sorry, and with that, you know, with the fact that they're in arrears with council, did you realise then that they cannot actually even apply for a grant to be able to start a business on their Aboriginal land? So that's something that, you know, we're hamstringing half of our community.
Well, I'd say through the chair, there's a few different things, as the director's saying, it's quite complex. But there is the other side of the coin as well. It has been working solidly for the last couple of years on gravel agreements and on ensuring that the owners of that land that are providing gravel to council are properly paid according to proper leases, proper rates and so forth. And this is, I would call it work in progress. We have moved considerably far forward over the last couple of years in doing that. There was a time when the Indigenous owners of that land were not recognised for their gravel contributions. Most of those leases, as council is aware, have now been resolved on terms and conditions that have been negotiated with the owners or with the land trusts. They are being paid or at the agreed rate, which they're very happy about, my understanding is, and in some cases there are rates that are being offset against the gravel that council has taken in the past. So each one of these, without delving into an individual case, each one of these is being dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and nobody wants to enforce rates on any category of owner who can't pay for it. But what we do need to say is that it is the law that council applies rates to all rateable land. We can't get around that. We can't say on the basis of anything. We have to apply that. So we have to take into account all these factors, and I'd like to suggest that if councillors would like a more detailed workshop again on this, we've had a number of workshops on gravel leases, terms, rates, conditions. There have been, if I recall, reports to council as well. And so I think what we'll do is, if I can make a note and take it away, we will schedule another workshop so councillors can understand in more detail exactly how councillors, the council administration is dealing with that. So
I think going forward, it's really important to identify those land trusts that can't, in terms of what council are saying. I mean, we identified people up in that Cohen area who had great big outstanding rates. And even here in town too, we got those rates forgiven largely on the understanding that there's nothing they can do about it, and they didn't have that again. That's now changed around. So I think that the next step is using that formula to go to government and say, this is the position we put these people into. This is the position we're in. Legally, we have to apply the rates. Hey, the two don't mix, you know? So we need to come up with some sort of repayment or program that meets our legal requirements, which subsidise or loosens up the ability for these prescribed body corporates and land trusts to be able to do something with their land. And I understand that was being looked at, Heather, on an ongoing basis, but it could almost be on a case-by-case basis, Andrea, with a repayment. You know, when people come in and say we want to make a repayment arrangement, well, that's got to be recognised and that's got to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis too.
And Mr Mayor, that is being recognised. It is work in progress though. You can't turn back 10 or 20 years overnight when things like gravel leases are so complex. The taking of water is so complex. The native title issues are very complex. And the involvement of the PBCs, it is something that has to be worked through, and it is being worked through, not only with the landowners and the PBCs, but also with the state government. So I think we've come a long way in that regard.
Now, on the books, how much money is in arrears on the rate base? Is it a lot?
I think we won't identify anything in particular at the moment.
Yeah,
we have an outstanding
rates. It shows up in the as a part of the deficit.
And we provide that information in all sorts of ways.
If we're never going to get it, there's no point in issuing a bill.
We provide it to council in focus with the outstanding rates.
Yeah.
So, or rates that have not been paid, not for any specific group, but in general. So there's a lot of information we put out to councillors about that. So I will make a note to pull it together again so we can bring it back to you and refresh.
Yeah, I think we need to.
And again, as a post-budget sort of broadcast or public information, we've got to emphasise, if you've got trouble, come and talk to us.
Yeah.
We can make it easier.
Yeah. So through the chair, just a question, what is the forecasted net rates and charges for 2021 and 2021 and 22? And what's the percentage of change?
It's about 4 something. The total amount recoverable is about 4 point something dollar. Michelle.
Through the chair, the remissions that are applied this year, that would prior to, and talk about budget, was $48,000. So the gross rates was $8.7 million. That's everything. That's all utility charges, general rates, etc. There is an attachment to the report that by legislation we have to publish what is the difference between the gross rates that are budgeted this year and for last year, and that's one of the attachments, and that is 8.13%.
Yeah.
So in last year's budget report, it had the forecast net rates and charges for 1920 is 7.4, and the forecast net charges for 2021 is 7.7, with the change being 4.19%. I'm just wondering, how does that look in this document this year?
Last attachment there is, we work on the gross rates. We've got to provide to council in the budget. So in the budget last year, the gross rates were 8.08 million. This year's budget, it's 8.7 million, a difference of 657,000, and that change is 8.13%.
That's 179.
Is that just for the rates and charges?
That's just rates and charges, yes.
And the percentage change was, what was that figure? 8.3%.
3%.
On page 179, Robin, that one.
My understanding is, through the chair, that that figure also includes any new properties that have been added to our rate base. It's not necessarily entirely rateable property increases. I'm not sure the number of new properties that were put on, if there's been small subdivisions and those sorts of things. It wouldn't be a significant number, but it would contribute to that increase.
Any other clarification needed, council, please?
My understanding was that the 5% is basically part of a 5-year plan to bring us up to a break-even point on just keeping the water and sewage going.
Yeah. Through the chair, it would be more than 5% increase required to do that over 5 years.
Yeah.
This is just the rates.
Oh, this is just the rates. Oh, just the general rate. Sorry.
And general rates and utility charges.
And utility charge.
But this is for the 5% in utility charges.
Yeah.
Will not get council to a break-even situation for utility sector. That would have to be a much bigger increase.
Yeah, like 13%.
But through the workshops, 5% of general rates and utility charges was deemed what we should be looking at to present the budget to council.
So, councillors, going down to crunch, I mean, there's a lot in this, just one motion, but I think the nuts and bolts is whether we accept or reject that 5% across the board rate for general, rate increase for general rates. Now, we've got Councillor Holmes and Councillor Hale saying they're not happy with it. I mean, I can't put that to the vote per se, because it's part of this whole broader picture. I think we need to determine, if that's acceptable by the rest of the councils, or whether you want to come up with a lower amount to make it generalised.
Could we discuss, like, if it was 1% less, what the difference is?
Yeah, but I thought that was the workshop we did that.
That would show on here, wouldn't it?
there's.
Yeah, we looked at all those
Options.
yeah. And that's how we got to the 5.
Yeah. So basically the 21-22 here on 179, the 21-22 amount there, just divide that by 5 and take a percentage off sort of thing, if you wanted to.
Through the chair, I don't think it's that simple.
No, okay, right, yeah.
Also, we did workshop this.
Yeah.
And I mean, there seemed to be concurrence with the previous workshop, not really making a decision, but there was concurrence because we talked about 5% and no discount. We've come back now to saying there is a discount. Personally, I think that 5% is reasonable, considering the position we're in financially, the fact that we're being pointed out and singled out by Queensland Audit Office as not being sustainable. We've got an obligation to try to be. We can only keep our fingers crossed that the FAG's methodology, changes somewhat and conditions get better. But I will say, as far as value for money goes, the last 10 days have probably seen at least $2 or $3 million pumped into the local economy through the efforts of the council. And we're doing this on an ongoing basis. We're always looking for ways to make it easier on our people. Each one of us is a ratepayer as well.
Well, I don't see any option to not have 5%, basically. That's the hard facts of it.
So through the chair, if you're looking at 5%, then maybe you need to relook at all these community groups who've got 100% rate concessions till 2023. I mean, do we need to look at all our leased facilities and what the expenditure is there? I mean, do we go back and look at commercial rental rates? All these things are going to impact on the budget. So if you want to put your rates up 5%, you're going to have to go back and review them as well.
That being reviewed on an ongoing basis,
As we can, Mr. Mayor, bearing in mind the resources that we have, the agreements that are currently in place, the community use which is currently there, the increased demand on our services, provide a level of service in relation to, for example, increased open space and all sorts of things. So it's a rather complicated consideration. We do not have people dedicated to just reviewing our leases. That has to happen together with things, as I mentioned, the gravel leases and all kinds of other arrangements. We have one person to do that.
Okay.
All right, I'm right.
Well, we've got to be able to go further up the food chain and argue the point that I know we're helping. If we haven't put our rates up sufficiently, they're going to say you're not trying hard. I would think that would be a pretty good assumption to make.
Councillor, this has been a good discussion over the last month or two, this morning and today. I think we need a foundation to move from. I think this budget process is really clarified a few things as far as where we need to target.
It's not an easy pill to swallow for anybody.
No.
Yeah, that's right.
Through the chair, I'd just like to comment, when we discussed the boathouse, they were getting a concession until the 30th of June this year. And in here, it's written in that they don't have to pay water or wastewater or environmental levy or rates until 2023. And that wasn't part of the previous discussion.
Councillor Haynes, we'll just take that on notice, but I will remind you that this is a publicly broadcast meeting.
Yes, and I'll have to leave if we're going to discuss it.
So look, we'll take that one on notice, and it's a fair point, but we just need to be a little bit careful. Okay, look, councillors, for the sake of good order, I'm going to put this motion to you all that we adopt that budget in all its comprehensiveness, which incorporates, I think importantly, that average 5% increase.
And putting the discount back.
And allowing for $100 per annum discount. Aaron?
Mr. Mayor, the two things being raised, because the discounts included there, you'll have to go through the process of an amendment and going back to substantive motion. But the point that we need to understand is council adopting the introduction, of maintaining a discount of $100 on the basis that the forecast deficit would increase by whatever that discount is. Because that would need to be put in there. Otherwise, we would have to defer everything and go back and try and do calculations. But if you're prepared to say the introduction of the, sorry about the word introduction, to include now a discount of $100 per rate or assessment, then that would be on the basis that there'd be an increased deficit.
Okay. Now, do we want to have two separate motions there? Like the 5% separate from the $100? Is that necessary? Or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the 5% is already incorporated in this budget, so there doesn't need to be a resolution on the 5%.
I'm just saying that because I believe a couple of our councillors will vote against that.
Just through the chair, when you voted earlier today for the rates levy, we did have two councillors that voted against the rate amount to be levied, so that's already recorded.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Hale, that your dissent has been recorded?
Yes, very right.
And Councillor Hale?
No, I'll be voting against it.
Yeah, but earlier you voted against the rating categorisation. Levy, the amount levied. It's just that this last motion we're going to so all-encompassing that would require a different sort of a different motion again, a separate motion again.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a suggestion?
Please, CA.
That if councillors adopt the various statements as tabled, and that is part one of the resolution, and part two is that the council include a discount of $100 for rateable or payment on time, correct?
Yes.
Noting that this discount will increase the operating deficit of councils. And we don't need to say what that is, it's just getting it formalised.
But there needs to be an understanding of how much it will be, which we can, what we've been saying.
Well, we only have an approximation.
Through the chair, the estimate of $100 based on 8% of the ratepayers paying by the due date is in the vicinity of $190,000.
That's what we're all right. So there's going to be an amendment.
If I can suggest that the recommendation is one, that pursuant to sections 169, 170, etc., and that there be a part two, which is that council resolves to include or to provide a discount of $100 to ratepayers who pay their rates on time
by the due date.
By the due date, noting that the deficit, the operating deficit of council will increase as a result of the inclusion of the discount. Do you have that? Yeah, great. Are councillors happy with that? So we need to have somebody move an amendment to the motion, which is currently listed on page 107.
Burns and Morris. Okay, so I'll put that then to the members. Those in favour of that amendment motion, please signify. Robin?
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Councillor Holmes against.
That's just for the amendment, that's not for the whole.
That's the amendment. That's
That's
right.
the amendment.
That's it, yeah.
If a majority of councillors approve the amendment becomes the substantive motion.
Okay.
Not me.
So
Sorry,
you're against that as well?
against.
Okay. So we now have a substantive motion that we need a mover and seconder for.
We need to vote on the amendment.
Oh, sorry.
So,
No, okay.
oh, sorry. Okay.
So we've got
Yeah.
Holmes and Hale
Yeah.
against.
And then the substantive motion becomes that two-part motion that you've just agreed to.
We have a mover and seconder for that, please. Morris and Burns. All right, I'll put that motion as the substantive motion. All those in favour, please signify. Councillor Desmond?
I'm sorry, I'm just totally confused at the moment with a lot of the figures jumping from court to court. What we're voting for is that 5% plus $100 discount?
Well,
Yeah,
5% doesn't need to be noted because it has already been built in.
It's already in the thing, so it's just
You're voting on the inclusion of a discount.
That's what we're voting on.
basically the
It's
discount,
including the discount.
because the 5% is already in the figure.
That 5%, is that including all your utility charges too?
They're on top.
Yeah.
That's,
So 5% across the board.
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
that's effectively what it works out to, yeah.
Plus $100 discount, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All those in favour, please signify. All those against? Councillor Hale is against. Councillor Hale?
Yes, against.
Okay.
Yes, against, please.
Thank you. Okay, the motion's passed in the majority. Thank you. Okay. And that's it. Thanks, Councillor. I just want to say I really appreciate the amount of scrutiny that you councils are giving this budget and genuine concern. So I think out of this comes a few actions we need to take forward. Okay. All right, thank you all. Meeting closed at 11:17.